Today's guest is Debra Kouri. She is the founder and producer and executive producer at Poutine Studios, a Montreal-based production company. She has a long history in multiple genres in both official languages. She's currently working on projects that include working with Gina Davis's Institute on Gender in Media. I know her from projects like Netflix's The Detectives. She hired me for a $2 million feature called Office Games that was funded entirely with private equity. So I think that's a really cool example of a project to talk about. She's also a board member of the QEPC, an acronym that we'll define a little later in the show. Debra, let's start with Poutine Studios. This is your production company. Historically, you've worked in every genre, every format, scripted, unscripted, doc, fiction, series, film. What is now Poutine Studios?
Poutine Studios kind of came out of the fact that I was an in-house producer for many, many years at a variety of production companies in and around Montreal, where I would either develop and create or produce whatever that company's mandate was. For the next chapter of my career, I wanted to be creating original IP that I was specifically passionate about. So on the unscripted side of things, I really wanted to be producing stuff that has some sort of social impact or socially conscious entertainment, because I believe that both are possible. And then even on the scripted side, I think you can still make a social impact in what you're creating. And so it kind of came out of that, saying, if I'm going to be spending a cajillion bazillion hours and 10 years on certain projects in some cases, let it be a project that I personally believe in, with collaborators that I want to be having long-term relationships with. That's where Poutine Studios came from. And my husband and I basically put our heads together, and we worked together a lot on the development side of things and on the production side. And so together we came up with what kind of name that, when traveling abroad, for instance, or even across Canada, it's a bit of an icebreaker. And so whenever I introduce myself as, hi, my name's Debra Kouri from Poutine Studios, or bonjour, je m'appelle Debra Kouri de Poutine Studio, like, it completely is an icebreaker conversation topic. Either people are like, oh my God, I love Montreal, I love poutine, or what the hell's a poutine? Like, in some cases from the Europeans, or, so it's whatever
Yeah.
it does, it's an instant icebreaker, which is what I wanted, because this is a networking business and you need to connect with someone right off the bat.
Amazing. And we're talking about producing. That's really, I brought
Yeah,
you on the show to
I
talk
guess so.
about producing because I don't know a better producer than you. And even that term producer, it can mean so many things. And I think it's kind of the most ubiquitous and often misused term, because it can mean creative producer, it can mean development producer, it can mean line producer, it can mean technical producer, VFX producer. And now, as more companies are even hiring in staff, they might be saying we need a producer, and what they mean is an editor or a motion graphics artist. So with that preamble out of the way, what is a producer?
I've been doing this for 25 years, and I think it's still the number one question that I get from a new person that I meet is, oh, you're a producer. What is a producer? Like, it's kind of, everybody kind of knows what a writer is, what a director is, but a producer is just such an all encompassing position. And there are very different kinds of producers, and the definitions of them are slightly different on the feature film side rather than the television side. And they're different in North America versus elsewhere. And they're also different within Canada on the French content side than on the English production side. I'll stick with the North American English for now. Let's say your movie is going to be nominated for an award. Who is going to accept the Best Picture award? Well, that's the producer. Why? Well, because the producer normally, and the lead producer, I should say, is the person who spearheads from idea to delivery and marketing thereof. And that's why on a feature film, it can take a very, very long time, particularly when you don't have the resources to be moving it forward faster, right? So the producer on the feature film side works normally on getting the creative and the development to the place that it needs to be, and raises the financing on the development side of things to be able to pay the writers and the story editors and brainstorm sessions and table reads and workshops and all of that kind of stuff. And then once it's ready and deemed ready, and a feature film can go through many years of that screenwriting development process, because in Canada it's very competitive, then you would be trying to get your production financing. And that's to be able to go to camera and film and hire your key creatives and get all the money together and the cash flow and your team. And then of course you're going to post it, and then you're going to get it distributed and the rest of the life of a feature film. On the TV side of things, that spearheading role goes to an executive producer. But there are a lot of executive producers on a TV show and on film, of course. And sometimes, well, most often, a showrunner will be getting an EP credit, as will a non-writing showrunner. People who put financing together or contribute in some way to getting the film or the TV series made, whether that is financial or whether it's with an introduction to someone who will bring on something huge and necessary to get the project made. Whereas content producers don't really necessarily focus on the money side of things. They are really just based on the content of the show, of the film, of the series. There are line producers, and a line producer traditionally does not deal with the content of what it is. And they basically manage the day-to-day of the production, line by line by line of the production budget. And so there will be a line for, for costumes. There will be a line for catering. There's going to be a line for drivers. There's a line for hard drives. You name it, there's a line for it. And there are industry standard codes that you follow. In Canada, we follow the Telefilm Canada form and the code system of how we divide a production budget. The line producer is pretty much in charge of that and works very closely with everybody else, with all the other producers. I think those are you've of course got associate producers and co-executive producers and supervising producers, but I think in a nutshell, everybody kind of reports to the spearheading person. So either that is the head of the production company or the lead producer at that production company. And very often there are multiple production companies, especially in a co-production. And so you have to work very closely together. And I don't know if that answers the question, but anyway.
I think that was perfect. Any producer will know what you're talking about, and anyone
I know
who
any producer, but it's still going to make like somebody that goes like, I still don't know what a producer does.
and
But it's a
well,
hard job description to sum up,
totally. And then once the trolls hate on us in the comments, we will distill that feedback to understand what value we could provide by having you back on and reframing the question with more specificity based on their needs.
Perfect.
So here's a hot take. I'm of the belief that every filmmaker in Canada needs to be a producer and self-produce. But you do have an opinion on the difference between a filmmaker and a producer. Can you tell me about your perspective on that?
So I think there's a difference between a filmmaker who is very passionate about their project, right? So it's something where in a lot of cases they've either written or co-written. They also want to be directing the project. And so left to their own devices of not being able to work with a career producer who's really that's all they do, is they by default become the producer of their own project. Nothing wrong with that. And I think there's more and more of that these days. However, when the filmmaker can partner up with a career producer or a production company, the difference is they're not only going one project at a time or two projects at a time. You have to build a slate. And the slate of projects is so that you always have something and several things at different stages of development and production and post-production, so that the production company is able to survive as a business. So what a lot of filmmakers don't necessarily do is think of the film and television industry as a business. And it is a business. It is a business that works with art and artists, but also with financiers and money people and executives and studios and decision makers. So I think a filmmaker, in my opinion, and I work with a lot of filmmakers, don't get me, yourself included, but I will not be the person who is going to say, okay, everybody step aside. I'm going to direct the film now. No, I want to work with directors and writers and writer directors where I can concentrate on the producing side of the project so that when it comes time to film something, the director can be the director and not have to worry about, oh my God, is there transportation coming to pick up my actors tomorrow? Or, oh my God, did we sign the release for that location tomorrow? The director should not have to be thinking about that. So, on a lower budget, especially on micro budgets, of course, the filmmaker is going to also be the producer. And I think it's a great way to kind of cut your teeth into getting into the bigger business if that's what you want to do. If not, then traditionally, and not always, but traditionally, I think a lot of filmmakers have one or two projects going at once. And, maybe they're working 24 hours a day on one with a little bit getting ready for the next one when this one finishes. Whereas a producer in a production company has multiple productions because they're looking at it for like the long game.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I mean, what I'm hearing in your answer, which isn't as hot a take as I was hoping, is actually we're talking about capacity. We're talking about
Yeah,
capacity. Capacity also within the constructs of here in Canada, the funding system. So there are certain
yeah,
deadlines that you have to hit. And as a
yeah.
career producer, you have those all in your calendar or Asana or
Oh,
whatever.
yes.
Whereas as a
Oh, yes. They're multicolored by date and by time of application date closing. And oh, yeah, you have to.
and they change every year. So you have to attend the webinar to get the latest update
Yep.
on this year's application. And those are things that, if you're writing and directing, you just don't have the capacity. Even if you have the capability, you don't have the capacity. And by building a team where everyone's playing to your strengths, then you can succeed. You can do more, right?
Yeah.
So I want to get back to cash flow because you talked about line by line for line producer, and we're going to get into
Yep.
cash flow. For anyone who hasn't seen like the telefilm budget, essentially what we're talking about is when you go into a spreadsheet, what you'd call in Excel or Google Sheets a row. Each of those rows might be, let's say, 34.92, and that code relates to costume or wardrobe. You probably know exactly what codes are which.
I know exactly. And I'm like, oh, he's not getting the right codes. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's what a line producer does and makes sure that every one of those lines is forecasted based on research so that when the day comes, it then accrues or reconciles with that forecast as closely as possible. And if you go over budget in that line, then you have to ask where's that money going to come from?
Where else am I going to save in the budget to make up for that bust in that line item?
And then ideally a great producer like Deborah would then propose options that they would present to the filmmaker so that the filmmaker isn't just told, hey, we're over budget. It's like a great producer will say, so we could cut this, we could move this, maybe we could try this with one less extra, or can this extra play two background character? Like a good producer in that way is actually very creative and can propose
Yeah.
options because they understand the filmmaker's vision. Anyway, that's a little more about line by line, going line by line. So in terms of cash
I
flow,
think it's also interesting if I can also just rewind a little bit with that. I think the reason why I'm good as a creative producer is because I have a long background as a line producer. So I was line producing for many, many years, where the line producer is usually the first person on set in the morning and the last one to leave. And all they do is put out fires all day long. And it can be a fire that is money related or logistics related or creative related or script related. It could be whatever. But line producing like that kind of, for me at least, allowed me to have such a big picture of the whole budget. And because a budget is broken down into A, B, C, and D per the industry standards, it allows you to say, like, okay, well, I know that when we go to camera on this project that I've read the script on, this is not going to work. So we need to talk to the writer and the director to say, this scene is going to be so expensive. Are there other ways of doing it? And let's think outside the box here. And so you'll brainstorm and you'll come up with that. And then that will be like, okay, that's fantastic. We were able to cut 5 actors out of scene 103 and 23 extras, which is a savings of, I don't know, $20,000, let's say. Fantastic. Well, I can now take that $20,000 I saved on that line on 1001, which is actors principals. And if I save on there, then I can say, okay, great. I can put that on catering 3201, or crafts or whatever. So I know. But all of this to say, so
Flex.
which I'm
What a
now
flex.
leading to, yeah, flex. So, which I'm now leading to, which is for cash flow. And it's actually surprisingly a question that I get asked a lot, because I think a lot of people are afraid of cash flows because they don't understand it. But the way I kind of always teach it to people is that if you know your project's life cycle from A to Z, so let's take a typical 12-month period, January to December, and then you take your movie, let's say, and let's say your budget is $1 million. I'm going to make it a round, easy number. Well, then, because your budget is already divided in A, B, C, D, A is considered above the line. So that's your writer, your director, your producer, your script related fees, and any stars and development costs that you would have gotten, for instance. Well, I know as a producer, the majority of that stuff is going to be spent before we go to camera, right? The majority of it. So if I know and my cash flow starts in January, but we're not starting principal photography until March, I know that all of my above the line is going to be spent in January and February, more or less, right? There's exceptions to every rule. A director doesn't get all of their payment on day one. So a director's salary from 501, code 501, will be spread according to their contract. And is that every 2 weeks, or is that when they hit certain milestones? So if I know that they get 10% of their salary on the first day of principal photography, and I know that my calendar, my first day of principal photography is March 15th, well, then I'm going to put, $10,000 as that in the cash flow. It's kind of hard to explain without showing references to what that is, but it's just basically your money spending. So all your money out, which is your production budget, versus all of your money in month to month to month, so that you know, what is my gap here? Where do I need the most money? Usually it's during principal photography, right? So that's usually when you're going to be spending the most money all at once. So let's say you are going to be filming from March 15th to April 15th or May 15th. Let's say it's a 2-month period. Well, you'll know that the majority of your crew, like your gaffers and your grips and your makeup artists, they're going to be fully paid by the end of principal photography. But your post-production crew in section C, they're only going to start to get paid when we're in post-production. So you have to anticipate when your money is going to come in, because a producer let's say your movie costs $1 million. Nobody writes you a check and here's $1 million, go make the movie. No, no, no. All the contracts have drawdowns themselves. So the production company has to go to the bank usually and get an interim financing loan, which is kind of like a line of credit, but much more complicated because a lot of the time it's also tied to tax credits. So it's how much money will the bank loan you in order to cover your bills until you get all your financing in. So there's interest, of course, to be paid on that, which goes into a line item in your budget. And it's complicated, but if you know the life cycle, if you've done this enough times, you know that, okay, I'm going to anticipate that, you know what? I think my director they only plan on 80 days of editing. Well, I'm not sure if he's going to make it in 80 days. Experience tells me I'm going to budget for 100 days, not tell him or her, and then say, let's see where we get. But it means my cash flow has to go to 100 and not 80. So it's a living, breathing thing that the same way that a cost report will be a living and breathing thing, your cash flow will adjust and be a living and breathing thing. And in some cases, especially like on documentary doesn't necessarily just take a year. A lot of documentaries take multiple years. So how much time is the bank willing to lend you the money for, and how much interest are you going to be paying on that? So that's the financing side of filmmaking or film and TV.
If you're interested in Debra doing like a deep dive, let us know in the comments because it's actually quite complicated to get into because there's so much sensitive material in these documents.
Yeah.
And I think this is a good time to queue up your work on the board of the QEPC, the Quebec English-language Production Council. Though English is in the title, this is a Quebec-based organization that actually advocates for official language minority communities across the country.
Yeah, thank you. But in our case, the QEPC focuses on the official language minority community, which are English producers and English productions and English filmmakers in the province of Quebec. But we partner with other organizations that are OLMC organizations that represent French filmmakers and French producers outside of Quebec. So we work very closely together, but our mandate is really to support our members in this province. And originally, like I'll give you an example, long before I was elected to the board many years ago, the QEPC was responsible for lobbying the Canada Media Fund in order to create an Anglophone minority incentive program within the CMF. And that was basically to be able to say, we are kind of at a bit more of a disadvantage here. We need something that will give us more financing on the federal level in order to produce things that are in English. And it is not only a fund available to OLMC producers and owned production companies, it is available to anybody in the province of Quebec who is producing English language content. However, in recent years, they have kind of made a bit of a OLMC has X percentage of the envelope, and then other production companies or owned production companies can still access it, but it was created basically on the federal level for the OLMC community. And in our province, what I've been trying to do since joining the board is in Montreal in particular, I can't really speak about the other cities in the province, but in Montreal, the English production community and the French production community are like this. And things might be different in the sense that you might not do a writer's room the same way or at all, for instance, on the French scripted side of things. There might not be a showrunner on the French side of things, but there will be on the English side. There's small little differences, but in this province, we share the same crews. And support each other and should be further supporting one another.
And so the QEPC has a mentorship program that currently has a call for applications open, which I am fortunate to have been accepted to within the last few years. And Deborah, can you tell
Yeah,
us a
it's
little
the
bit about
first year.
that?
Yeah, sorry to cut you off. It's the first year I'm going to be running the mentorship program. Actually, this is our
Amazing.
fourth year. Mentorship is something that I feel very passionately about, especially for members of underrepresented or typically underrepresented communities and BIPOC communities. It is something that when I was coming up in the industry, there was not a lot of hand holding. It was pretty much go figure it out and maybe I'll answer a question at the end of the week for you. I don't believe that that is constructive and productive. So I've, especially this year and in previous years, I've given some webinars mainly about budgeting. Last year, I think I was doing it more about development versus production and how to budget development and how to budget production and how the two inform one another creatively and financially. So this year, our call for applicants is still open. And because I'm running it this year, I'm trying to include new things and new seminars and new experts to come and new consultants to come and give either in-person seminars and or webinars that will really teach emerging producers a little bit more than if they were a lot more if they were just left to their own devices to Google and figure stuff out.
Love it. Is there anything else that you want to talk about, promote, or share?
I think the only thing is that I know we've talked a lot about money and financing, but the creative needs to lead. You cannot finance, you cannot be part of the business properly if your creative is not tight. And by tight, remember that in this country, if you are financing your films through the public system and through grants and through funds, whether they're private funds or they're certified independent production funds, whatever, it's a competition. And in order to be competitive, there's only so much money that that fund has to give out. I sit on some juries sometimes for various funds where I get to be privy to see what people are applying with. And I'm very often shocked at the lack of competitiveness in that application. And so I think now more than ever, you have to do as much networking as you can to build and get as many more experienced than you people attached to your project to make your package and your creative package competitive in order to get the financing to get it made to the next step. So I guess that's where we could leave.
Okay. Definitely, I'll have to have you back. We didn't get enough time to talk about community. People call it
Yeah, community
networking.
is huge. Yeah, but it is community and outreach. Yeah.
Yeah, how can we help each other? Rising tides lift all boats. On the next episode, we should also talk about you having produced this $2 million film with private equity versus working within the Canadian funding system. So lots more to talk about. Excited to have you back. Let's end on what is your favorite movie or TV show and why?
Oh, what a loaded question, Gavin Seal. Okay. For me, one of the best ensemble cast movies was The Big Chill, right? It's an 80s movie, but fantastic cast, fantastic writing, fantastic music. And on the Quebec side of an ensemble cast, there's Crazy. Jean-Marc Vallée's Crazy. So those are two films that, because I love ensemble storytelling and interactive and crossover saga storytelling, those are things that are important to me. So I'll give you that kind of example. But ask me about favorites, it'll change every day.
I'll take it. Thank you so much, Deborah. Always love talking to you. Appreciate you making the time.
Yeah, you too. Anytime. Let's see if there's another one.